Ah! Now that you're awake, I think I'm going to tell you about my life. Summertime is essentially here, which is awesome because I have so many things planned for the summer. I'm gonna get a job, hopefully at the place that my brother and sister worked when they were in high school, just because it's completely serendipitous. They didn't really like it very much, but all the crazy people left. And me and some friends are gonna volunteer at the Ronald McDonald House, which is gonna be awesome. I've been looking forward to doing volunteer work. That's actually why I quit cheer, so I could dedicate more time to volunteer. Well, I didn't quit it. I finished out the season, but I'm not going back next year because I want to go volunteer after school. And I'm finally going to have my license because, in case you didn't read the description of my last video, I failed that license test, but it turned out to be a good thing because I get to, like, if I take these drives with these instructors, then we get lower payments on our insurance, which is super. So it turned out to be a good thing. However, I was bummed, really bummed, that I don't get my freedom until like a couple weeks. But it's still going to be a good summer. Oh, I just realized how zoomed in that last shot was, but I don't really redo it because it's kind of funny. Is the lighting over here better? Ah, it totally is. Anyway, it's going to be a superb summer, but before summer, I have to finish up my finals, and for my Christian formation final, since yes, I do go to a private school, I've got to do this thing, and it's called a practice story, because we are reading this book by Donald Miller. Try not to move the camera, because I don't want to make you seasick like my first vlogs did, because that was just awful. I was watching those the other day, it was bad. Anyway. This is the book we're reading. It's called A Million Miles in 1,000 Years, and it's really good, and I really want to buy it for myself because I've learned so many things. This book is about stories and how we see our lives in stories, because our lives kind of are stories. I think that that idea isn't completely flawless, but it is kind of true. So for our Christian formation final, we have to live a practice story, which is like, okay, so we learned the different elements of what a story has. Like, it has a story is a character who wants something and will overcome conflict to get it. So if we're trying to live a good story, then we have to want something big and overcome a lot of conflict to get it, if that makes sense. So in our practice stories, we're just going to do something small. It doesn't have to be this huge life-changing thing yet, because those things, I mean, you can't just sort of hop into them easily, but our Christian formation final is to live a practice story, which is find something we want, overcome a certain amount of conflict to get it. And so, what my practice story is, it is calling Father Andrew. You guys, I'm really nervous. The reason my practice story is to call Father Andrew is because recently I've been struggling with the whole denominational thing. Like, it's been on my mind for the past couple of years, actually. And I've come to the conclusion that the Protestant church just really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because, okay, so a lot of what the Protestants believe, it sounds weird talking about it like an outsider, sorry, but is that, you know, you've got to go off of scripture alone, sola scriptura, and that sounds like it makes sense at first, but at the same time, like, the early church, like, they've been searching for God and, like, building on what they know about him for, like, centuries, and there's, like, a bigger base for what they believe. Like, a lot of the questions that we as Christians like to ask, the Protestant church can't offer as good of answers as the like Greek Orthodox and Catholic Church. And so I've been struggling with that because, I don't know, my family, like, I grew up in a home really Protestant, and it's been really great because I think that was a great place for me to start out. But I feel strongly recently that I don't belong there, like, as a final place, and it's really conflicting because my boyfriend is Greek Orthodox, and I want to make sure that he's not the one influencing me, because this is a huge deal. Like, because God, he's, like, the only reason I wake up in the mornings. Like, he's my entire life, and if I compromise, like, my relationship with him, or if I change my relationship with him because of a boy, that's really, like, awful. Like, so awful. Like, I almost want to cuss because it'd just be so bad, but I won't because I like to try to keep my videos clean for whoever might be watching them. Yeah. So I was talking to my friend Leah the other day, and I told her that, well, she asked me how I liked Greek Orthodoxy because she saw me at their Pascha service, which is their Easter service, and she asked me what I thought, and I told her that I really liked it, but it was really complicated because of reasons I just mentioned, and then others also. And so she gave me Father Andrew's number, and she was like, well, why don't you talk it out with him? And I was like, okay. I am so scared, and I don't really know why. People don't generally scare me too much, but phone calls, I mean, you don't get any body language hints or anything, and I don't know how to ask what I'm trying to ask either, you know? But this is a good inciting incident. This is one of those things where it's like point of no return. I just have to organize the moment in which I'm going to call Father Andrew and do this thing. I really do think this is a great idea for a final. I encourage you guys to try and live a practice story too, because a lot of us spend our time on the computers or something. Like, the machines, man, they're taking us over, they're making our lives boring. But if you just go out and live a practice story, even if it's something small, like I'm gonna bike across my state in a week, that's great. Just do it. Just do something for the sake of doing it. You can stop watching the video now if you want, because I kind of want to redo this thing from this book, but if you don't have time, that's okay. You're not going to be missing anything much, because you get the gist of the video. But I really want to redo this thing, because it was really enriching. Is it recording? I think it is. I'm just going to trust that it is. I'll read it twice if it isn't. Okay. He said the real reason for the lodge was to host leaders from foreign countries and talk about peace, to talk about how leaders can bring peace to their countries. I was curious about how he got world leaders to fly into the middle of nowhere and talk about peace. Bob smiled and looked at his wife and said, "Well, now that's an interesting story. I suppose we stumbled into that one, didn't we?" Bob looked out at the inlet, trying to organize the story in his mind. When his children were young, he told us, he was spending time in Uganda helping the government work through some legislation, and they asked him if he would be willing to serve as the American consul, essentially Uganda's official American lawyer. Bob agreed, but while he was a good lawyer, he never had to interact with diplomats. On the flight home, he wondered what he'd say if he had to meet with the president of South Africa, or the ambassador from France. When his kids asked how the trip went, he told them he'd been asked to serve as Uganda's official lawyer, and he was a little nervous to meet the dignitaries. So Bob asked the kids what they would say if they had to meet with the leader of a foreign country. Adam, the youngest, said he'd ask them if they wanted to sleep over. Bob said that was a terrific idea, because when people sleep over, you get to know them really well. Lindsay said she'd want to ask them what they put their hope in, and Bob and Maria agreed that that was a beautiful and important question. Richard, the oldest, who had recently been given a video camera, said he'd want to record the interviews so he could make a movie. Bob and Maria thought that was a terrific idea too. Bob said that if he ever met with a foreign leader, he'd remember their suggestions. But after thinking about it, Bob decided that the suggestions were too good to risk to chance. "Let's write letters," Bob said. The kids wondered what their dad was suggesting. "I'm serious," Bob said. "Let's write all the leaders in the world and ask if they want to come over for a sleepover, and if we can interview them and ask what they hope in." The kids got very excited. Maria smiled and loved the idea. Bob told the kids that if any of the world leaders said yes to the interview, even if they couldn't come for a sleepover, he'd fly them to that country and they could videotape Lindsay asking what they hope in. Bob didn't expect anybody to write back, so he brought home more than 1,000 pieces of stationery, and the kids researched world leaders and came up with more than 1,200 addresses for the heads of state and assistants. For a while, they heard nothing, and Bob confessed he was relieved, but then a single letter came in, and a few days later, another. Both of them granting an interview, and then another letter until all 29 world leaders contacted the Joffs, instructing them on how to make arrangements to interview their country's leader. Bob shrugged his shoulders when he told us the story. He put his family on planes flying them all over the world. The kids' teachers were furious, saying that he was harming his children by taking them out of school. But Bob convinced them that his children might learn more interviewing the president of Paraguay than by reading a book about him, and the teachers reluctantly agreed. Bob said the world leaders fell in love with his kids. He said there was no way he could have received as much hospitality on his own. Maria described one meeting in which the kids were waiting in the giant hall of a palace, sitting at a table for 50, when the president walked in the room, stiff and formal. He leaned over and shook each of the children's hands without smiling. The children were intimidated by the man and didn't smile either. The president then asked the children if they wanted a glass of milk or a cookie, and the children said they would. "Thank you." The man clapped his hands, and the doors flew open. Teams of servants flooded the room, holding trays of cookies and trays of milk, setting them on the table in front of the children and their wide eyes. The president laughed and opened his arms and told the children they were welcome in his country. At the end of each interview, Adam presented the world leader with a box that had a key in it, explaining that the key was an actual key to their family home in San Diego. He said they sometimes lock the door when they go to the store, but that he could just let himself in, and that If he ever wanted to have a sleepover, he was welcome in their home. The relationships the family began that year would sustain. The world leaders wrote the children letters, and the children wrote back. And one world leader even came to San Diego and used his key and stayed over with the Jaffa family. That year, Bob said he learned people are just people, even if they are world leaders. He said most people want what's best for their friends and families, and if they are given the opportunity to talk out their differences, they will. And so when the law firm did very well one year, he bought the land around the lodge and built a place for the world leaders to come and have a sleepover. And they come? I asked. We've had a few, Bob said. I hang their flags from the banister, and we sit and eat and talk. We explore the inlet on the boats, and usually do a little cliff jumping. I tried to imagine a foreign diplomat jumping from one of the cliffs around the inlet. I smiled even thinking about it. Bob said before the dignitaries leave, they sit and write a peace treaty, just some informal language that commits to making the world a better place, about how they will live sacrificially and try to do things for others as often as possible. He said each of the leaders signed the treaty and takes a copy home to remember his time at the lodge. Bob and Maria's kids, now grown in high school and college, each have a quiet dignity and confidence. They also have an informal charm, as though they just know they would like us if we take the time to get to know each other. It's obvious they played the roles in their story their family was living, the roles of foreign dignitaries traveling with their parents on the important assignment of asking world leaders what they hope in. Their story had given them their character. I read you that because it's incredible. I mean, those kids probably never did drugs or, drank or smoke or anything because, they had real stories to live. I mean, they had better things to do with their time than, screw around. I mean, it's just about finding a good story, you know? Finding a good role in this world where you belong. I think that's probably all I have to say for right now. Thanks for watching, and I hope you're having a wonderful day, and tell your mom you love her because it's Mother's Day.